And that's what we're about building every single day. Again, my name is Scott Williams. I'm a member of Workers' World Party. I'm an organizer in Philadelphia. It's nice to see you all here. I know there's quite a few other panels you could be at. None as stimulating as this one. The discussion will go well. So, first of all, I want to explain. I'm going to be speaking on two topics and trying to kind of connect the two. First is about socialist unity and what that means practically and theoretically. And I want to speak on that, especially because there's a big meeting that happened on Wednesday night here with a variety of other tendencies and groups within the movement. And they had a certain conversation. I want to elaborate what a Marxist Leninist thinks on that. The second part I want to talk about is what is Marxism Leninism and what does it offer to young people these days? And, what can we be so confident about? What can we be so inspired about? So that's what I'm going to. Those are the first two. So I think I've learned this fact from Caleb, but it was that recently in 2011, the most looked up words on the online Merriam-Webster dictionary. Is anyone who doesn't know, what do you think were the top two words?
Socialism.
That's right, socialism. That was actually number 2. What was number 1?
Communism.
Unfortunately,
Marxism?
not yet. Capitalism. So, you paint the picture, right? You have this economic crisis that is bearing down on people for 3 or 4 or 5 years now. And people are trying to name what the hell is wrong with me. It's like if you have a disease, you go online to WebMD and you're like, all right, my leg hurts. Like, what the hell is going on? And people are looking it up, and they're thinking about these concepts. And they're looking it up, and they see capitalism. And what is the alternative to that? They look for socialism. And despite what the definitions are, and I don't have those definitions here, it certainly shows that there's something going on in this country. And you can imagine, and my bet is that most of the people looking up those words are young people. Because in our schools, there's absolutely no education other than that capitalism is the future, was the past, is basically the top height of humanity, and that socialism is some disgusting, hateful, kind of ideology that leads to kind of slavery of the masses. So we know that's not correct, but we've got to be clear about that. So it's clear though that people are looking for alternatives. In the past alternatives, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute, the ideas of anarchism, social democracy, they're not holding the water that a lot of the young people in the movement want them to do. They don't really provide answers. We come to the Left Forum and you see, really, I walked through the book, the 2 different display areas, and you see probably 50 or 60 different groups, all pretty small. Either they're publishers. I guess here you can't really have political parties, so you have publishers and different groups that exist. And you see the Greens, you see all the social dems, you see some other people who just sell books now. And you wonder, what the hell is going on here? Why, in a country where the U.S. left is so inadequate for its historic task of creating revolution, why are there so many different groups? I'm sure all of you thought that, and especially for young people. I was talking to someone just the other day, and she was telling me, I don't get it. Like, I don't know why you'd want to join any of these groups. They're all so spiteful. They bicker. They yell. They're always talking about the other one. They're always kind of self-defensive. They don't get it. Like, who's actually capturing that revolutionary optimism? Who's actually capturing that vision that young people offer? I'd like to think that Workers' World Party is that organization, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But at the same time as people complain about all these different left groups, all these, the Jacobin magazine, which is a pretty fashionable paper these days, they talk about, they call them microsects. You can imagine that. It's just like 20 different people over here, 200 people over here, some other guys over here, and there's just like a split after a split after a split after a split. And they talk about, all these different newspapers that are written on recycled toilet paper, and like, how the hell is that ever going to reach the masses? And that is disgusting rhetoric. I'll tell you that. But at some point, it speaks to what some of the young people who are coming around the communist movement are looking at, and what they get when they arrive at Left Forum, what they get when they come to any big anti-war demonstration. What do you see? A lot of different tendencies. And why is that? Well, in my mind, it's clear that, coming from the 1930s, when there were really 2 to 3 major parties that existed, you know, in the entire history since then, it's been a lot of reaction. There's been, of course, a lot of you and a lot of older comrades who experienced the time in the 1960s and 70s, which seemed like you were on the brink of revolution. It felt like the whole world was changing. But for the rest of us, generally, it's been an ideological desert with some mirages of struggle, some kind of moments where you're going to kind of pick it up and feel like you can win. But in general, it's been a desert. And that reaction has had a huge impact on our, you know, our relationships within the movement, on our organizations, and on our ability to maintain our politics. And I believe that really at this point, a lot of the ideological deviations, a lot of the changes, a lot of the kind of ideas that the working class cannot make history, that, you know, the workers and the oppressed do not need to unite, that somehow one sector or another, or even the idea that the U.S. working class and the oppressed in the U.S. can't possibly create a revolution in this country and have to wait until the rest of the world has a revolution. You know, we can debate these ideas, but in general, in my mind, it comes from the weakness of our movement, of the splintering, kind of overall kind of lack of holding on to the vision that Marx, Engels, Lenin, and so many other people have put forth in the past. And I would just say, when it comes to that as well, there's every single group, they have their own kind of hostile attitude towards each other. There's a lot of sectarianism. And honestly, that comes out of a weakness. That sectarianism is not about being right. It's about justifying your own kind of personal challenges and justifying your own organization's kind of challenges with building the movement. And I'm happy to say that I don't indulge in a lot of this sectarianism, because I find that, if anything, this hostility is not moving us to where we need to be. It's not attractive. It's not a recruitment strategy either. So, I mean, it really doesn't work. So in regards to that, this is where I come to the discussion on socialist unity. Coming from the perspective of, well, what the heck is going on? There's all these different groups. Who's right? Why would you join any of these groups? And so the perspective on socialist unity, in my mind, has four basic points. And these actually come from a statement that we put out at the 2010 U.S. Social Forum back in Detroit, which is a very similar moment to kind of these gatherings like the Left Forum. But the four major points, I mean, the first one I think that you really have to start with is no reliance on the Democratic Party.
There's some markers if you want to use them.
Yeah, so I'll do it right down here. So it's no reliance on the Democrats. Can anyone give me an example of reliance on the Democrats?
Get out to vote.
Get out to vote. Okay. Well, any other examples of what's a reliant, Leilani?
Well, like when the unions every 4 years stop everything they're doing to throw their weight to the elections as opposed to just continuing their organizing efforts.
Exactly. So for all of us that are active in unions work, you see all of a sudden the move is, oh yeah, we're going to go campaign for a local Democratic politician or usually a national Democratic politician. Meanwhile, the work in organizing new shops, new places, all those resources and time is squandered. And we want to say, look, the Democratic Party has no future for us. Whether it wins in Congress or not, while there will be somewhat of an impact, that does not mean that we need to focus all of our time and effort into, or even a fraction of our effort really, into supporting these Democrats. We have to hold no personal illusions about the Democrats versus the Republicans. That's not our struggle. It's not the class struggle. And it really, there is no future in that. The second part of socialist unity in my mind is, in our party's perspective, is the centrality of the working class. Does anyone want to take a guess? What does that mean? What is centrality of the working class? What could you be centered on if it wasn't the working class?
It's centered on the working class and the oppressed. It's what Marx and Lenin, Marx said, workers of the world unite. Lenin said, workers and oppressed of the world unite. And if you're not focused on the working class and the oppressed, then you're focusing on the centralized of the ruling class and the oppressor. And obviously that's not where we go. We're for the people.
So in a real way, it's and I'll get to the solidarity with the oppressed and also internationalism is the next 2 points. But the centrality of the working class has a practical element to it, and it means that in all of the work that we do, we are reaching out to the comrades, to the people in our class, and saying, look, we need to elevate the struggle. And we're figuring out every day how we do that. And it's a practical point of how do we win, how do we build organizations within the working class. The third part, which Jeremy started to allude to, is self-determination for oppressed people. Does anyone want to take a gander? What does that mean? Or people know very well what that means. Leilani.
Well, it means that oppressed people get to determine the nature of their own struggle, and we support their struggles unconditionally without trying to tell them what the right way to wage struggle is or anything like that.
Exactly. Sorry. So there are very many examples of this, especially on the international scene. But even if we look today within our movements, you can see examples of whether it's either groups saying, "Oh, I would like to support them, but they do all this stuff that's so ridiculous. Like they do all this." Like even a question of, in my mind, it's most recently in North Carolina, there's been a huge attack on the right for people to vote, and a lot of the sectors in the oppressed community are saying, well, we need to demand that democratic right. Other people on the left might say, well, fuck that. You can't just get out to vote for the Democrats. That's ridiculous. And the point that we come from is we want unity with the sectors in our class that are going to fight the hardest. And we want unity with the oppressed because we know, historically, the importance of the oppressed rising up with the working class. And so the question is not whether or not we support the Democrats or whether or not we support the Republicans or even viewing bourgeois elections as a useful tool for our class. The question is, what are the demands of the oppressed? How can we support that? And our comrades in North Carolina are working with them and mobilizing on these actions to defend the basic rights of workers and people. The last point on socialist unity, which is important, and we run into a lot, is a term that communists call internationalism. And that's a loaded term. But really, what it means is having an anti-imperialist perspective and supporting the working class rising up. It has a lot of connection to the third part, which is self-determination for oppressed people. But what it says is we support people, working class people, fighting against U.S. imperialism and fighting to create their own society. And it's tactical, it's strategic, and it's kind of an overall perspective on how we're going to win. Does anyone have any examples of what that means? So internationalism or anti-imperialism? Richard?
Well, it impacts the struggle in a big way. And a lot of people are reluctant to support struggles that have any kind of action in it that they personally wouldn't do themselves. And then what they fail to do is see the overall picture of what is at stake. And I'm going to give an extreme example because I used this some years ago. There was this Iraq war. Now that everybody knows was a war that was fought on false pretexts. So we defend the self-determination of the people of Iraq, and that's exhibiting true internationalism. Now, a lot of folks would criticize the movement, like the resistance in Iraq and some of the actions of the resistance and their tactics, and say they wouldn't support them because of that. But the defining thing that was happening is that they were under attack, and that's what should, not the tactics they used. And I'm talking about, say, some people were getting beheaded and things like that by people in the resistance. And so a lot of folks equated, the whole movement with of the resistance with the beheading instead of looking at what was happening and that the country was under attack by an imperialist nation with the greatest military power in the history of humanity. In the end, it's cost that country materially in so many ways. Loss of life, diseases, the destruction of the environment, destruction of the infrastructure, destruction of the country. It's been set back. It can't even be quantified how far back Iraq was set by the war. The raiding of museums and libraries and stuff like that. So
exactly. So, Leilani.
Well, it's also, I think about like the idea that we're all part of a global working class and like making that prominent, and just like for instance to go back to the union movement, the idea that you have to like buy American, or like people in other countries are stealing our jobs and things like that. Like we have to counter that at all times and say no. Like we're they want to keep us divided so that we don't all like unite and fight together. So
Exactly. Another good example here. It's clear. So as Marxist Leninists, we've come with this proposal about socialist unity. Time and time again, and we're very open to talking about it. We want to build unity, and I think it's clear. What's more inspiring than figuring out how to get a bunch of communists, a bunch of very serious activists and revolutionaries to come together and take on the epic battle of defeating capitalism? What could be more important? What could be more, what is it? Not only is it an incredibly challenging task, it'll bring a lot of people towards it because they see the movement uniting, they see the movement coming together. And we believe that from this basis, we can work with a variety, depending on where people are coming from, but we can work with groups, and we want to, and we're for that unity. And that's very different, I think, from the conversation that was discussed at the pre-Left Forum meeting on Wednesday. So from this, and this has a practical, everyday kind of perspective too. It's about not being hostile to other people in other groups. It's about trying to win over the best elements of those groups towards a broad political demand. And in the day-to-day struggle, it comes up, whether we're in the demonstrations or in planning meetings for major demonstrations or in the labor movement or in the student movement, we always strive to bring forth these principles in a positive way without being, hyper polemical or super critical of other people. And that's because we're for unity and we're for, the positive aspects of, a truly revolutionary, communist human being. So, we can get into if you have questions about socialist unity, we'll try to pull it together at the end. From here, I want to talk about what does Marxism Leninism offer young people, and what is the perspective moving forward. And I think this is a pretty good start for some of the basic principles of Marxism Leninism. We have to go back a little bit more than that. So the basis of our perspective is kind of the philosophy of dialectical materialism. That's a big, jargon, kind of meaningless term to so many people. Does anyone want to try to take a stab at it? What is dialectical materialism? All right.
Well, as Caleb was just talking about it, dialectics is, things are constantly evolving, things are constantly changing, and materialism is looking at what is scientifically understanding things that are concrete and as they actually are. And as Marxism Leninism as an ideology is also a science, and that's how we understand the world. We don't, and a lot of other people, they've got superstitious beliefs and theories and so forth. We look at the facts, the concrete facts, and I think with the four core things you've got there, that lays it out pretty well. If anybody else wants to chime in.
Yes, you take away the two parts of it, right? What is dialectics? Dialectics what it means is that everything is constantly in motion. There's nothing that's permanent. There's nothing that's stagnant. There's nothing that's forever. This counters bourgeois ideology, ruling class ideology, particularly religion. And it says, look, like everything is in motion, everything is moving. There's no everlasting end. Materialism it's the basic idea that your social existence determines what you understand. You can't think of thoughts that you've never even every process of your being, exists within a broader world, and you can't think of and you're impacted by that unbelievably and irreconcilably. From here, so we start. That's dialectical materialism is the science behind Marxism. It's the science that says that there basically is an insolvable antagonism based in capitalist society in its essence, and this is time immemorial, not permanent, but we were talking about dialectics, but it has changes within itself. But the contradiction within capitalist society is between the working class and the ruling class, and the basic struggle within that is what defines history. and it's based on a kind of irreconcilable differences. One class, the working class, the vast majority of us, the 99% if you will, it's probably 99.9% of us, but we exist by selling our labor, and we are, every day we go to work, we're exploited, and basically that is our social existence. And there's a lot of differences, there's a lot of kind of oppressions and differences amongst the working class in general. But in general, our social existence exists in this way. That is directly opposed to the ruling class and the capitalist class, which they exist to exploit us, they exist to make money off of us. And they run the government, they run the media, they run everything else. And that antagonism between the working class and the ruling class is the basis of understanding of history. And that's why, as Leilani said, we view that on a global sense. We view the global working class fighting against the imperialists, fighting against the global ruling class. And that is the essence of the era, the entire last 400 years, and continuing to move forward. And that struggle is the one that will define history in the broadest sense. So, what does this mean for young people? Like, where do we stand right now? What does it mean to be a young person in the U.S. today? I mean, it means a lot of unemployment. It means that, the average is $28,000 in student debt, and a total of over $1 trillion in student debt. You basically are, this is debt peonage. You're looking at low-wage work, or no work. The statistic is over 50% of college students, I think it was over 60% of college students who graduated in 2010, they were not working in a field that involved anything to do with what they studied if they graduated college. And broader amongst the young people, it was the unemployment rate in general, it's including the people who have given up on work, is something like 40%. So, we're talking about an entire generation that has been devastated by the capitalist crisis, and just the inner workings of capitalism in general. And we see that system as a whole has kind of outlived its usefulness, and it's kind of coming and crashing and bringing about its own end to that contradiction between the working class and the ruling class. And soon enough, the working class will take over, and that's where the Marxist Leninist Party comes in. So, kind of within, let's see here. With the one thing that, so there's a variety of trends within young people these days about what they believe in, especially for the ones who are activists. And you see coming about in Occupy Wall Street or any of the big youth kind of oriented movements, you're going to see kind of, I would say, three major trends within young people, and they're broad kind of political trends. One is, and this has been kind of particularly pronounced in the last 20 to 30 years, is anarchism. And anarchism, it's an individualist ideology. It's based on, and it's an ultra-left ideology which really seeks to kind of, its imagination of overthrowing capitalism is to have kind of a very small group of people, kind of a clique of people come together and kind of create a coup d'etat in a way, and to immediately destroy any functions of the state as a whole, bringing the working class to some type of liberation. That being said, there's quite a bit of heterogeneity of ideas within that, and there's a variety of people who think different, parts of that are true, and exactly how that's going to happen is up to debate. But that trend amongst young people, it particularly comes about with the fall of the Soviet Union. In my mind, it becomes ever more present. Young people are looking for an alternative to the Democratic Party, and what do you got? For me, it was like Adbusters magazine. That was a big, very popular magazine, and it provided a very shallow kind of middle-class perspective on what is wrong with our society. And it led to kind of an individual lifestyle kind of appropriation of politics, which didn't lead to mass struggle. It didn't believe that the workers are going to uprise and throw over the system and create a genuinely true democracy where workers run everything. Instead, it kind of leaves you with a blank game plan. It says, do your thing. Well, I feel like young people are finding that to be a trap, and I would say that more and more, and I really do believe that anarchism is not providing young people with the answers they're looking for, and they're looking deeper and deeper. So you have anarchism on one side. On the other side, you have what is referred to often as social democracy, or reformism, and kind of a general idea that we need to build a struggle, and building that struggle, is essential to creating a new society. The problem is they don't actually believe in kind of taking power. They don't actually believe in breaking with the Democrats. They believe that they need to build a struggle as much as possible and to be a part of these big movements. And somehow out of that, you're going to reach a better society. And that's really a piecemeal deal. Can anyone give me examples of social democracy they see in their lives or in the movements they're in?
I think you could read the titles of some of the workshops.
Yeah. That's right. So left forum is a real hotbed of social democracy, I would say. It's clear that, Jeremy, did you have?
Well, it goes back to when the reliance on the Democrats and the unions, and I worked for a union, and not even every 4 years, it's like every time there's an election, the unions put all the resources behind a candidate that then, decides legislation that goes against the interests of the members that pay dues that money goes towards, and it's like, it's a vicious cycle of, we're here to help you, but then we're going to give money and resources to these scumbags that are not going to help you and actually go against your interests. And it's, on the one hand, they see the problem, but then on the other hand, they continue the problem, right? So it's like the issues, and then still supporting capitalism. A lot of European countries, and then a lot of those, and these groups coming out in Greece, like Syriza and stuff, that we want to be a part of the EU and down with the communists, and a lot of the left, a lot of young people, looking at that as some kind of alternative. Seeing the problem, but not actually, recognizing what needs to be done.
What social democracy also fragments the struggle in that everything is its own struggle. This is the anti-war movement, it's over here. And this is an ecological movement, this is the anti-fracking movement, and they're all separate things. And they have to be addressed, and they're all the most important thing also for each group that's involved, and the connections between them isn't always, it's very seldom made within the social democratic movement. Everything is just its own phenomenon instead of everything is connected as we believe.
Great. So to counterpose both anarchism and social democracy, there's a broad term there's a broad term of Marxism. We believe in Marxism Leninism. What that means, really, you take the analysis of Marx, the analysis of capitalism and its inner workings, and the historical analysis as well, and the scientific method of dialectical materialism. You take that analysis and you combine it with the analyses of Lenin. And Lenin, particularly, his discussions on the need for a party, the need for a cadre party, a group of activists who are very dedicated and coordinated and in the struggle, and kind of like what Caleb was talking about, a very high-level grouping of professional revolutionaries. You have that concept. You have also, his writings on imperialism and with that self-determination for oppressed peoples. And you have a variety of other concepts. And that together creates the way forward for the working class and the working class movement and the socialist movement. And to be honest, if you look at any of the socialist revolutions that have happened in the past 100 years, you're going to find in almost every single one that Marx is Leninist. That was the ideology, and that was the leadership, and that was the way forward for the working class. I guess the last point I wanted to make was, in our party, we have two other kind of basic assumptions they're very important. And this is kind of about how we treat each other, how we approach socialist unity, how we approach building a mass movement, how we approach building a party. And those aspects are, the first is revolutionary optimism. And this comes directly out of dialectical materialism. It's a basic belief that we know we're going to win. We have to figure that out. And it's not going to happen, it's going to happen sooner rather than later if we get ourselves up and organized and together and really attack the kind of current crisis. But we always have to be optimistic. And without that, there's a lot of ideological traps that you can get yourself into about not even believing the working class is revolutionary. Beyond that, it's a general love for humanity, and that's something that Che has written a lot about. And it's about, finding the strength within ourselves to kind of create a movement to transform the world. I think my time is up. I think it's been about 30 minutes. I want to thank you all for you being a part of this panel. I was hoping that we'd break this kind of facade of I'm a great, speaker and you're down here, and I know, either way. But I hope we can continue this discussion, and let me know if you have any questions.